If you are hoping for a turnaround for the Diamondbacks in the 2026 season, one betting odds maker is casting doubt on that with their prediction. We'll talk about that on this episode of the D-Backs Under Review podcast. And hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of D-Backs Under Review podcast. I am your host, Michael McDermott, the founder, publisher of D-Backs Under Review, the newsletter. So, as you can notice from the topic list, the betting odds maker, BetOnline AG, released their 2026 win totals. When under Arizona, the Diamondbacks are set at 78.5 wins. Of course, I found that out from Bob Nightingale, USA Today. He dropped that on X. And then, of course, I wrote the story on that for Heavy.com. Should go to Heavy.com for some of my content on the Diamondbacks. I've been doing some Arizona Cardinals content over there because the Cardinals fired their head coach. And that's probably the biggest news item that's happened with the Arizona Cardinals in the last 2 months. But I digress. So, getting back to Diamondbacks topics here. Before we get into that, make sure to hit that subscribe button and leave a like. And comment down below if you will take the over or the under for 78.5 wins. So, BetOnline is setting the win total for Diamondbacks essentially at 78 wins. If you believe the Diamondbacks win more than 78, they want you to take the over. And then if you believe they will win less than 78, then you will take the under. And obviously how the betting lines go is they set it up in a way that they try to get the betting to be as close as 50-50 as possible. I wonder if that line is going to move depending on the money they get over there. Now, a lot of it will depend on what the Diamondbacks do next. So if the Diamondbacks are slated for a 78-win season with the roster they have now, then the question is, where can they go about it in order to move that needle forward, get into the 86, 87, 88 wins they would need in order to get in the postseason. Now, of course, to add, if we go by the WAR principle of adding, the Diamondbacks would have to add 8 wins to their roster. Now, of course, we're going based off the 2025 record of 80 wins. They would have to add 8 wins to the roster. Of course, doing it in free agency certainly isn't going to be easy, as the Diamondbacks have learned all too well that the price of adding an additional win in the free agent market is roughly around $11 million per additional win add. Of course, $11 million per WAR is the market number, especially for the type of players the Diamondbacks are trying to add. They're looking to add bullpen guys. Now, of course, with the bullpen's the biggest area the Diamondbacks need to address. And of course, that comes down to whether or not what they're going to do in the offseason. Because we have no idea what they're going to do in the offseason. It feels like we should have a better idea in the coming weeks. As I mentioned in the last episode, their offseason is held by Ketel Marte rumors. It feels like the conclusion of those things, and it's looking more and more like the Diamondbacks are going to pull him from the market. The conclusion of that is going to likely determine what's next. And of course, the bullpen obviously becomes the number one priority. A right-hand hitting first baseman is another one, although there are more affordable options in that regard. So the Diamondbacks definitely need to add a needle-moving reliever to the back end of the bullpen, a guy that can step into the closer role. And then when Justin Martinez and AJ Puck are healthy, that guy would slip into the Kevin Ginkel role of the high-leverage setup guy, and you'd like a big swing-and-miss pitcher as well, like Ginkel did in the 2023 postseason. So if the Diamondbacks are at 78 wins for the 2026 season, it's going to be a pretty interesting call. Like I said, I think Kayson would survive a 78-win season if the Diamondbacks are in a situation where they kind of tread water for the first 4 months of the year, and then they get Martinez and Puck back, and then maybe they go on a little bit of a run. But considering we're talking about 78, 79 wins, that's probably not the likely scenario. It would be, I guess, on the cusp whether they would decide whether to extend Torey Lovullo or not. That could be a decision that is based on what happens during the season. Lovullo's contract is up at the end of the year, so that kind of makes him a lame duck manager. I don't know if they will do an extension. They have done this multiple times in the past. If you look at 2022, they gave him a 1-year extension that partly into 2023. They initially gave him a 1-year extension in July. And then when the Diamondbacks made that run at the second half of August and September to get into the postseason, they made a deep postseason run. I think by the time they got to the World Series, they had already announced a 3-year extension for Lovullo, which ends in 2026. Now, Hazen's extension runs through 2029, although the Diamondbacks certainly would have to get back into the postseason for Hazen to see it all the way to the end, which would probably mean another extension. And the way I see it is Lovullo's job security is tied to Hazen's job security. It's going to be pretty difficult for Hazen to replace Lovullo if he himself is on the hot seat. And that might be an interesting case because, I don't know if a first-time manager would necessarily want to be in a situation where the the GM, I'm stuck in football talk, head coach, the manager, they do the same things, I guess you can say. But Hazen, if he was on the hot seat, like I said, a 78-win season certainly makes Hazen's seat warmer. If they were to move on from Lovullo, that would make replacing him a little bit more difficult if Hazen is liable to be fired after 2027. Now, but as I said, the direction of the season will matter as much as the win total. I'm not necessarily sold on the idea the Diamondbacks are a contending ball club in 2026. There's a lot of things they need to add. As I mentioned, the pitching, the bullpen certainly is the number one spot, and their pitching depth is kind of iffy, especially on the rotation side. It's a little iffy because, while I think their starting five is okay, it requires Ryan Nelson to break out, Brandon Pfaadt to break out, Eduardo Rodriguez to stay healthy, Merrill Kelly to stay healthy, and Soroka to basically throw the most innings he's thrown in 7 seasons. So we look at, in Soroka's case, the last time he threw 100 innings was 2019, his rookie season, in which he threw 174 innings. Now, of course, the Diamondbacks get that many innings out of Soroka. That's going to be one steal of a deal. But I would certainly be more likely to take the under on the Diamondbacks win total than the over on Soroka's innings. I don't know if BetOnline actually has that as well, but that's not important. So, and again, recapping, BetOnline AG has the Diamondbacks at 78.5 wins, which is 4th in the National League West. The Dodgers are at 99.5 wins, followed by the Padres at 85.5. The Giants are at 82.5, and the Diamondbacks at 78.5. And of course, you said the half wins because it is impossible to push, I guess you can say. So if you're predicting 78 wins, that's the under, 79 is the over. And we'll see where those things add up. Maybe we'll double check this thing back in about a month from now and see what happens with the Diamondbacks do from there. So as we look at the Diamondbacks situation, obviously it comes down to what they'll do with Ketel Marte. That will definitely decide this topic. And we talk about when is the Diamondbacks' next window of contention. And I've mentioned it a couple times. It feels like 2026 is kind of like a reset year, not necessarily rebuild, blow it up type thing. It's a situation where the Diamondbacks just have so many injuries that it's just conceivably difficult for Hazen to build a roster that can make it to the postseason unless almost everything goes right on the field. And we're talking, and then we were in the same situation 3 years ago with the Diamondbacks in 2023. It was Ketel Marte had injury problems in 21-22 with the hamstring. Corbin Carroll had just gotten to the major leagues. And the Diamondbacks had traded their best outfielder for a catcher prospect and a right-handed outfield bat on the last year of team control. Now, of course, in the case of the 2025 Diamondbacks, Zac Gallen was the National League's best starting pitcher in the first half. Kind of fell off a little bit in the second half, but was still a viable number 1. Merrill Kelly emerged as the number 2. He repeated his 2022 breakout season. And then you look at Brandon Pfaadt, kind of gave the Diamondbacks some innings down the stretch. The rotation actually didn't hold up very well in 23, if you look at it. Like Zach Davies was terrible and got released at the end of the year. Nelson wasn't particularly good after a promising big league cameo at the end of 2022. And Brandon Pfaadt certainly wasn't good in the regular season, although he kind of put it together a little bit towards the end of the season. Diamondbacks were much more aggressive at limiting exposure in September and October for Pfaadt, and that's why his numbers got better and why he hasn't quite put it together in the 2 seasons since. But again, the Diamondbacks will be, I guess you can say, relying almost on the exact same pitchers in 2026 as they were in 2023. Except now Pfaadt's got more money. Nelson's in his first arbitration season, and he's kind of showing signs of a breakout. And then they gave Eduardo Rodriguez $80 million. And his innings are going to be certainly a talking point for the next 2 seasons. As I said, the 2028 option that he has vests based on the number of innings he throws in 2026 and 2027. And that number is a combined 300 and I think 150 in 2027. I think are the triggers for his 2028 option. So we'll see how that goes with Rodriguez. And to me, how Corbin Burnes also looks after coming back from Tommy John surgery, and we won't know what he looks like in 2026. So what he looks like in 2027, I think, will be the better determinant of what the Diamondbacks do. Because the Diamondbacks certainly have spent a lot of money on Burnes, and they have with the idea of him anchoring the top of the rotation. And certainly now with the elbow injury and Tommy John surgery for Burnes, the likelihood that he'll remain a Diamondback after the 2026 season went from probably 50-50 to 100%. So with that in mind, the Diamondbacks still have 4 and 140 left for the final 4 years of Burnes' deal, which I guess you can say is fine if Corbin Burnes makes a full recovery and looks like the pitcher he was before injuring his elbow. As you look at Burnes' 11 starts, had a 2.66 ERA. I think the pretty good peripherals across the board. It was looking like Burnes was having an all-star type season, and along with the injuries to Puck and Martinez, it felt like the Diamondbacks were pretty much on the back foot by June 15th. It was they were going to be hard pressed to sustain anything at that point. And unsurprisingly, because of the injuries to Puck, Martinez, and Burnes, the Diamondbacks kind of fell off a little bit in July, and then the offense kind of struggled a little bit as well. And it feels like a team that was built to make a deep October run. They had all the ingredients going into the season, it just fell apart as a result of those injuries and kind of how much more difficult it made it for the team to win. Of course, there were certainly some, I guess you can say, certainly some concerning signs from the team's performance in May as well, going into the injuries that happened in regards to the bullpen kind of starting to fall apart because Martinez was unavailable for most of that with the dead arm phase initially before he came back. He had the dead arm phase for most of May, came back about after a short IL stint, and then blew his arm out not too long afterwards, but blew out his elbow about 2 weeks after coming back. So for the Diamondbacks to be a contender again, they need all three of those. They need both Puck and well, I don't know about AJ Puck, like I said. I've said before on the podcast, if the Diamondbacks could get AJ Puck on a 2-year deal, that would certainly be the best outcome, necessarily, because then that way Puck doesn't have to worry about elbow surgery impacting his earnings necessarily. And of course, I say that, of course. I don't know what the Diamondbacks will do with Puck again. We're probably coming up soon on the arbitration filing deadline. Diamondbacks are file and trial, so we'll probably get news on that later. But having Martinez and Puck available out of the back end of the bullpen certainly would raise the Diamondbacks' ceiling in 2026. The question is, can they tread water long enough that their returns are actually going to mean something? And then you look at the rotation, then the Diamondbacks are kind of in the same situation as with Burnes. You're not sure what you're going to get from him in 2026. Can't really rely on him to hit his top form coming back from surgery in 2026. You can certainly hope for the best in 2027. But I feel like the Diamondbacks need to get a lot of innings out of their starting 5. And that's why I consider the 2026 season as kind of a reset, hope for the best type year. Not to be too disappointed if the Diamondbacks ultimately don't make the postseason, don't necessarily make a rash decision unless the Diamondbacks bottom out as a team. If there's a 2021 type season, I think that's the only way you see Hazen and Lavelle get canned after the year. That type of year. Could be, I don't know if it'll play out like 22, where the Diamondbacks got a little bit of energy and they were more competitive at the end of the season, even though the record didn't show it. Or if you look at 23, where they rallied in the last 6 weeks of the season, kind of went on a crazy run to get into the postseason. Or 24, when they did add AJ Puck at the deadline, that increased the Diamondbacks' margin of error in games. People forget that the second half of the 2024 season, the Diamondbacks had one of the best records in baseball because their pitching staff got healthy. Gallen being healthy, Merrill Kelly being healthy, and getting Eduardo Rodriguez back, even though he was kind of iffy. And Ryan Nelson also showing the first signs of breaking out after struggling for basically the first year and a half of his career. That's what fueled the Diamondbacks' second half run in 2024. They're kind of hoping that the same thing happens in 2025. And that's more or less what it has to be. So again, if anything happens in 2026, that would be a bonus. I feel like the next window starts in 2027 when Martinez and Burns are fully healthy and have finished their recovery from elbow surgery and can have a normal offseason. And also at the same time, the Diamondbacks should get some of their prospects coming up. Their top prospects should be hitting in the next, I guess you'd say, season and a half. We talk about in the infield, you have Tommy Troy, Lou James Groover, Ryan Waldschmidt in the outfield. Depending on what happens with Drew Jones is certainly a candidate to hit the major leagues in that window. And then you got pitching prospects Daniel Egan, Ashton Izzy, and David Hageman coming up at the end of that time frame, towards the end of that time frame. So the next season and a half, the Diamondbacks farm system, the best prospects in the Diamondbacks farm system should be banging on the door. And you look at towards the end of the season, Slade Caldwell certainly could be a end of 2027 candidate if everything goes well in 2026. So that's kind of the next contention window. You make a run, you kind of show that you can improve that where you have all your pitchers healthy, that you can make a run in 2027. Not necessarily to win the division, but certainly feel confident that you can win at least 87 games in 2027. That's what the 2026 season needs to be at a minimum. If they don't get there, then I think it will lead to a managerial change unless the team bottoms out. That's the only way I see Hazen getting fired, is if the entire roster bottoms out, injuries beyond belief, worse than 2025. Although I think such a situation might actually not lead to a firing, because we saw what happened in 2021. So again, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching all the way in. We still got more to talk about. So we're starting to get some movement on the starting pitcher free agent front. Of course, that was baked into the equation, because the Japanese posting window is 45 days, and something had to happen with Tatsuya Imai. So what happened in his free agent situation, him and Okamoto had signed over the weekend. Imai got a 3-year, $54 million deal, which if you're the Diamondbacks, you're hoping Zac Gallen at least gets that type of deal, because the Diamondbacks would get a first-round pick if he gets something similar. Of course, Gallen's free agency is slightly different. There isn't a timing window. You know, Scott Boras is very patient in the offseason, although he's been flying around lately. He was in Houston on Sunday, and then he was on Toronto on Wednesday. It's like representing both Imai and Okamoto. Believe it or not. I don't know if he's also actually, I think most of the Japanese free agents have already been accounted for, so like I said, when you look at the starting pitching market, Framber Valdez might come off the market soon. It looks like the Mets are considered the favorites, and then the Orioles are still kind of lurking in the in Valdez market. Those are the two teams. And I'm not sure what will happen on the hitter side. Like I said, I think we'll start to see movement once the Diamondbacks say, hey, you guys, we tried. You didn't give us an offer we liked. We're moving on with Ketel Marte. Sucks to be you. Although, of course, obviously, the teams that would be interested in Marte are probably in a better position going into 2026 than Mike Hazen. But I digress on that one as well. So going back to Gallen, the starting pitching market, like I said, Valdez needs to come off the board before teams start looking at Gallen, because then once you get to that point, there aren't very many pitchers to consider over Gallen, and depending on what Zac Gallen may provide, you might have either a number 2 or 3 starter from Gallen. I don't think he's an ace anymore. The strikeout rate came way down in 2025, down from like 24 to 25% that Zac Gallen provided. In his peak, it was down to his strikeout rate dropped down to 21.5%. The walk rate jumped. The walk rate's held at around 8 to 9% the last 2 years. And you look at the strikeout walk rate for Gallen, you look at 2024 and 2025, those are the lowest numbers of his career. And of course, first it came down to the big spike in walks. Gallen's walk rate in 2023 was was under 6%. In 2022, his breakout year, it was under 7%. Of course, you look at that 22 season, that was Gallen's highest. K minus BB ratio percentage. You take the walk rate subtracted from strikeout rate, that was 20.3. If you're over 20%, you're doing something right. 20% is very good. I guess you can call it. I don't know if you can call it elite from ratio standpoint, but you're kind of close on that if you get that as well. And Gallen's peripheral, if you look at Gallen's metrics from 2025, his ERA was 4.8, but obviously if you've been following me around, ERA is literally the least sticky measure going from one year to the next. Because ERA is an over-defined method of tracking a pitcher's effectiveness from a run prevention standpoint. ERA and RA9 are that way. So when we look at Gallen, like I said, strikeout and walk rates would be the first two things I look at. The strikeout rate certainly trended in the wrong direction. While he did improve his walk rate towards the end of the season, Gallen was sitting around 4 at the trade deadline. He finished the year at 3. And you look at the extra metrics, F450 FIP, 412 XFIP, 428 xERA. It strikes me more that as Gallen is a mid-rotation starter more so than a top-rotation starter. And Gallen does have a track record of durability. Since the 2022 season, Gallen has made 31, 34, 28, and 33 starts. And he's pitched 184 innings in 3 of the last 4 seasons. So a team picking up Zac Gallen is going to get likely a number 3 starter that can give you 180 plus innings every year when healthy and has a good track record of health. But he does have some quality contract metrics that concern me a little bit. If you look at 2025, his barrel rate, he gave up the most barrels of his career, higher than 23. Barrel rate just under 10%. So that's the one thing I worry about Gallen. And I think Gallen's problem with the barrels is more so a case of not necessarily a stuff problem rather than a command issue. I feel like when you look at his first half, it's a struggle of mislocating off-speed pitches in the heart of the strike zone that get hit for home runs. And Gallen gave up 31 home runs on the year. If we break it down, first versus second half, because if you look at Gallen's second half, he kind of had a little bit of a second half run, especially through July and August. I don't think the ERA necessarily reflects how well he did, because 3.97 ERA, but he gave up 282 WOBA in the second half. So, yeah, if I look at Gallen's home run rate in the second half, it dropped from 164 in the first half, 164 home runs per 9 innings in the first half. That dropped to 17. And also a big indicator of Gallen's second half improvement was the walks. Went from 9.1% at the All-Star break down to 6.6%. Of course, his strikeout rate kind of dropped similarly. It was a 2% drop. But the strikeout minus walk rate improved by 1%. So the reduction in walks there was a bigger reduction in walks than strikeouts. But you'd have to dig deeper into the quality contact metrics. Like I said, StatCast can give you a first versus second half thing. I do think Gallen's second half ERA is a little bit inflated. I think his last 2 starts weren't necessarily good. I go to the game log. Like I said, you can do a lot of things on Fangraphs. So we'll do August 2nd. So we'll look at August 2nd, 2025 on Zac Gallen all the way to September 20th. I think that's certainly a healthy enough sample size because Gallen's last start was horrendous. So you look at Gallen, obviously let's look at it. So you look at Gallen's run, obviously 6 innings plus in all but 1. So 9 of 10 starts. Only 2 of those starts were not a quality start. If you look at the game against the Giants where he gave up 5 runs and lost because he gave up 2 home runs and he walked guys. And the 5-inning start against the Texas Rangers as well, Gallen necessarily struggled with the strike zone. I don't remember if that was the Gallen versus Kelly game that closed out the series. That obviously, if you look at that game, that was decided by Ketel Marte in the 9th inning. I'll try to pull up strikeout and walk numbers just real quick over that 10-start stretch. Here we go. So yeah, 21.1% strikeout rate, which is right along his season average walk rate of 6.6%. So if you take that 10-start sample, tongue twister. If you take a 10-start sample, I think Gallen could get a multi-year deal at the same average annual as the $22 million qualifying offer they rejected from the Diamondbacks. And of course, if you're the Diamondbacks, you certainly hope it's a 3-year deal if you're not signing him, because the difference between 50 and not 50 is 45 picks in the 2026 MLB draft. And I feel like the difference between those picks is almost a full grade in terms of a prospect. Where you look at the end of the first round, that's probably a 45 plus future value guy. Whereas you look at the end of the second round, well, that's a 40 plus. So we're full half. We're not necessarily a full grade. We're a half grade prospect. Although I feel like there's a notable gap between a 45 plus and a 40 future value prospect in terms of value. Of course, the Diamondbacks, in my opinion, are littered with more of the 45 plus guys. Guys I'm not 100% sold on being everyday players. So again, I don't know if the Diamondbacks would necessarily be prepared to offer Zac Gallen anything. There has been no reporting on if the Diamondbacks have offered Zac Gallen anything. I think it might be a case where the Diamondbacks are just going to let Gallen explore the market, and they have probably a number in mind. And if the number they have is better than what Zac Gallen gets in free agency, maybe they sign him. But if it's a case of Zac Gallen gets better offers in free agency, they'll just let him go. Like I said, you're rooting for him to get a $50 million deal either from another team if you're trying to get that first round pick. So closing out this episode, we'll move on to a little bit of a prospect talk here. So again, we're at the point where just the diehards are left, just the ones that want to hear me ramble for half an hour on various Diamondbacks topics. So came across, of course, my job at Heavy is to monitor social media and see if there's any possible stories breaking out. One of the things that I found was a Baseball America tweet about Kayson Cunningham, the Diamondbacks' first-round pick in 2025. So, we've been following around. Cunningham is moving off shortstop. He's going to second base because the Diamondbacks don't have enough second base prospects, you know. There's quite a few. Because Diamondbacks obviously have Tommy Troy knocking on the door in the major league level. Then you got Yancel Luis going to Double-A next year. And then Demetrio Crisantes, a guy who I'm not sure fits in the where he fits defensively, but that's a case where you like the bat and you'll figure out the defense later. And we don't know what the infield's going to look like in 3 years. Could he be a DH? Maybe. First base? There's no long-term answer there. Third base? Probably not. Actually, I think if Crisantes could play third base, I think we'd be talking about him as a shortstop. But it feels like, again, Cunningham, Troy, Luis, and Crisantes. The Diamondbacks certainly have 4 high-quality darts at second base. Troy being the first throw, and then Luis and Crisantes being the second and third almost in the same year. Both I have coming up in 27. Luis and they'll both be 40-man roster decisions after the 2026 season. In fact, 3 of them will be 40-man roster decisions within a calendar year. By the end of the year, all 3 of the 4 prospects I mentioned will be on the Diamondbacks 40-man roster. Because obviously Troy's going to already make his major league debut. Luis, I think, is too good a prospect to risk losing, especially if he has a good year in Double-A. And then Crisantes, obviously too good a prospect to risk losing as well, even though best case scenario finishes the year in Double-A. That's going to be a pretty interesting infield in Amarillo once Crisantes is healthy. Because you already have Torino at shortstop. Theoretically, you could try to move Luis to third base, and it wasn't necessarily a fan of what he looked like in the fall league at third base, but the way the things lined up. In the fall league, he played a lot on the left side of the infield. He doesn't necessarily have a plus arm, and the sample size I saw on that side of the infield is relatively small compared to him playing second base. And Crisantes certainly could slide down to first base, although I believe that Amarillo will also have Ben McLaughlin at first base, so I could see Luis, Crisantes, and McLaughlin and Torrin being your starting infield by June 1st in Amarillo. Because I said Crisantes was on a heater when he had that shoulder injury, which is kind of funny. You go through if you ever covered the minor leagues, it's like you're certainly looking at box scores to write recaps, and recaps kind of report. It's like you go through there and it's like a guy's pinch hit for. It's like, oh no, what happened. Then you go back and watch the game, because it's like, unless you're paid to do it, you're not going to sit through 12 hours of baseball in the minor league. So of course, you can skip the inning breaks if you're not watching live. You can skip through those and put things together. And that's kind of when we found out the shoulder thing, and then it was kind of interesting. Like I said, anytime a player gets pulled from the thing, you're checking the video to see what happened, and you're hoping for the best. So Baseball America has so Nick McCord, who does the rankings for Baseball America for the Diamondbacks, has Kayson Cunningham is Diamondbacks number 2 prospect. I think he's also the number 2 prospect on Fangraphs as well. He was at the end of 2025. I'll double check because they just released the Diamondbacks prospect list. Of course, Fangraphs now throttles you if you don't have membership, and obviously that there's, with the whole advertising revenue model becoming outdated, and I don't blame them for that. So, okay, so they have Cunningham as number 7 prospect. They have him as the number 2 prospect coming out at the end of 2025. So they have Cunningham at 7. So I digress, obviously. So Cunningham at 2 for Baseball America, number 7 on Fangraphs. When we'll wait and see with what Emily Pipe and what Sam Dykstra puts for the Diamondbacks top 10 in the start of the spring. Of course, we'll see. Diamondbacks fans will probably see Cunningham in the spring breakout game. I'm not sure if I'll go. I'll consider it. If I've got the time and money for it, I'll certainly consider it. So anyways, digressing. So again, with Cunningham, like I said, Cunningham and Caldwell give the Diamondbacks 2. I guess you can call them short kings, although I think Cunningham certainly has I guess you can say, a better body for projecting power, whereas Caldwell's kind of in that Corbin Carroll body type, although we can't really compare Caldwell to Carroll, because Corbin Carroll is literally a freak. Freak athlete, freakishly strong, and crazy smart too. And it's unfair to compare any prospect in Diamondbacks history to Corbin Carroll, because Corbin Carroll is literally the best homegrown talent, prospect-wise, come through the system. Now we can argue Upton, Goldschmidt as possible counters, and certainly Upton with the number 1 overall pick is going to get some consideration, and Goldschmidt being the best hitter in franchise history. Those are 2, but in my opinion, Corbin Carroll is the best prospect to ever go through the Diamondbacks system, and you cannot convince me otherwise. Now, of course, that could change depending on what the Diamondbacks do in the future, if they hit a home run on an undervalued profile like they did with Carroll. Or they could just flat out suck and luck out to be in a year where they get a Bobby Witt Jr. type talent. That could happen. Of course, that didn't happen when they took Upton, but that's one of those cases where they took a very good player in a very deep draft, and unfortunately, because there were so many high-quality players from that 2005 draft, I think Upton certainly didn't get as much a fair shake in Arizona, because you look at his track record, Upton was an All-Star MVP candidate in 2011. So, I guess I've ranted quite a bit. Like I said, we're 33 minutes in. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching all the way through. So, kind of wrapping things up here. 78 wins. If the Diamondbacks finish 78 wins, there's certainly going to be an interesting offseason. The next window of contention, I feel confident in, is 2027, the start of that season. Zac Gallen's free agency should start to pick up once Framber Valdez signs and we get a better idea of which teams are interested. And with Gallen's qualifying offer, I think it's going to be down to big market clubs that are okay with sacrificing a draft pick, because they're going to solve their needs by being aggressive in both the trade and free agency market, because payroll concerns are not a thing. And Kayson Cunningham, like I said, you definitely want to watch him if you are in California, if you live near Visalia. That guy's going to be worth the price of admission. See how he looks. Like I said, I wouldn't base too much on his 2025 sample size, so it'll be interesting to see how it goes. So again, if you like the content, make sure to subscribe and leave a like down. Comment down below. Will you take the over or the under on 78.5 wins? I personally think over, but not necessarily much over. But at the same time, the offseason is still young and nothing has really happened in the last month. So we'll see what the Diamondbacks do to move that forward. We will monitor that number and we'll talk about it when we get closer to spring training.